Welcome back to the Done Deal Show. I'm joined this morning by the Press Association's very own Nick Purawal. I think I got that right. Welcome to the Terrace and the Done Deal Show. How are you, Nick?
Very well, thanks. Thanks for having me. How are you doing? You okay?
Yeah, I'm listening. I love the transfer window. Whether my team's winning, landing players, missing out on players, it's the ebb and the flow, which I absolutely love and enjoy. And of course, we're here to talk predominantly Chelsea today. Of course, there'll be some sort of branch off stories because some of Chelsea's outgoings as well are linked to some big Premier League club. But lots going on at Stamford Bridge right now, Nick. You know, must be keeping you very busy as a Chelsea correspondent.
Yeah, very. Absolutely. I mean, it's it's obviously a fairly transformative summer in a number of reasons for Chelsea, isn't it? As we all know. And so I think it's an opportunity for them to sort of reshape the squad. And as we've seen, Todd Bowley and his team are not wasting any time on that at all, are they?
No, they're not. And I'm a Man United fan but I try to be as unbiased as I possibly can on these shows. And Chelsea fans have been sort of bantered and pulled from pillar to post by rivals all summer. Todd Bowley's a cowboy. All you're doing is hijacking people. There's no plan. You're not going to land anybody. And it does appear, and of course, we'll probably start with the Koulibaly news, that Chelsea are going to bring Koulibaly and Nathan Ake in for almost the same price that Juve wanted for De Ligt. I mean, that feels like fantastic business from my point of view.
Yeah, I think both of those deals are close. I mean, and obviously you get down to the point where some of the finer details take a bit of time, don't they? So there'll be a gap between news coming through to say, it looks like it's almost there, and then things being, officially sort of announced or it being clear that it's over the line. But it certainly seems like, with Koulibaly, they've made a lot of progress quite quickly. And I think, it's interesting, isn't it? I think hijack is probably the word of the summer in some respects. But I think the way, because Chelsea have been playing catch up and they've been clear about that, they've had to, pursue multiple targets at the same time and in the same positions in some situations. So Rafinha is a good example where they always knew Barcelona were far more advanced than they were, but obviously it's a player that they liked and talked about and decided to shoot their shot on, and it didn't come to fruition. But that's one of those things. Obviously, the player had his heart set on Barcelona for a long time, and sometimes that's not something you can change someone's mind on. But if it had not come to pass, he would certainly have signed for Chelsea and been happy to do it. So it's one of those things where it's shades of grey, isn't it? Sometimes, as the fan in all of us will, and fans generally look at it, and you want every player who signs for your club to have dreamed of it since they were 5 years old. But sometimes that's not the reality, isn't it? And then in a way, it's probably nicer to hear from someone who's coming. I don't think any fan any supporter wants a player to say that if they don't mean it, do they? Really? So.
No, I mean it's. I mean you've been around a while. I'm sure this is not your first rodeo, as it were. What Chelsea are doing with the Rafinha deal, what Man United are trying to do with Frenkie de Jong, this is fairly common practice. It's just I feel like this is the first summer since transfers have moved they move primarily onto social media now in terms of the news. Like people will tweet out their updates before they release their articles, and then it's like the article's coming later type thing. It's now the fans are kind of being exposed, and fans want day-to-day updates. And when you want day-to-day updates, you're in a situation where there's this ebb and this flow, which fans never saw before. If you were sort of tasked with releasing one story a week, rounding up Chelsea's transfer window, what you're being told on a Monday, by the time you print on a Thursday, could change. And then anything in that middle ground, you might then leave out your story because it's no longer relevant. But suddenly now people want an update. You must get this at the moment because of some of your tweets have gone viral. Every time you tweet, your replies will be full of update on Kounde, update on Ake, update on this, and that's what. And then you give an update, and they're like, "Well, that's the same as yesterday," because there's been no change. It's the nature of the transfer window that's really changed massively. In terms of Koulibaly, I mean, this feels like it's come around pretty quickly. But this has been a player that Thomas Tuchel has kind of earmarked and been very high on the priority list to come in as a centre-back this year for Chelsea. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Latterly, yeah, and I think it's certainly Koulibaly's certainly a player that Chelsea have, looked at and been linked to for a long time, years and years, and I think tried to sign in the past and it hasn't gone, and obviously got close but not got over the line. And I think the change in ownership obviously firstly stalled completely the plans that Chelsea had when there was uncertainty even about who would be what the future would look like. And once everything was sorted out, they were able to sort of sit down and map out a way forward. And obviously the conclusions they came to were let's get cracking and freshen up the squad, rejig the squad a little bit, bring a number of new players in, and he's so they've sort of gone after a number of centre back targets at the same time, really, and he's been one of them. And I think Thomas Tuchel thinks a great deal of him, and I think anyone who's seen him play, would probably think likewise, wouldn't they? He's experienced, he's strong, he's decisive, he's a leader, good organizer on the pitch and those sorts of things. And so I think in many ways it's a really good replacement for Tony Rudiger.
It absolutely is, and I've seen sort of some people refer to him today as like a no-nonsense defender. And I'm like, this guy's got great positioning. He can play out from the back. He reads the game brilliantly. This is Chelsea essentially, for me, have got two of the top 5 centre backs now at their club. Once this Koulibaly deal is like officially finalised, it does appear that it's the deal's in place for it to all be done. One of the questions that's come through from one of our members and contributors, Jem, is: do you think Chelsea will buy 3 centre backs? There's obviously still links to Kimpembe. There's a Nathan Ake situation. Do you see 3 centre backs being a possibility for Thomas Tuchel's men this summer?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I think it is a possibility. Yeah, I'd be, personal opinion is I'd be slightly surprised if they managed to pull off 3, if that makes sense. If they can manage to get 3 in. So, partly law of averages and partly a lot of the time, obviously, clubs are waiting for to be able to identify a suitable replacement and get to a suitable position in a negotiation over a replacement before they'll allow a deal to progress for a departure. So, yeah, I think probably a lot of sort of stars would need to align for 3 to happen. But they're obviously certainly pushing hard at enough numbers of centre backs for that to also make sense. So we'll have to see how it shakes out. And obviously Kimpembe is one who's been heavily sort of linked there as well. So someone that Tuchel's obviously worked with before and likes a lot. So and knows well. So and obviously the key with that is someone who worked with before, so he knows how the player ticks and he knows what sort of motivates him and things. And so, I think if whenever a manager is happy to go in for a player they've coached before, that's a really good sign of what a manager will think of the person as well as the player.
Yeah, and I think as one of the Chelsea fans watching has pointed out here, he goes, he thinks it depends on Levi Colwell's development in pre-season. And I think that there's a lot to be said about that with Chelsea. If you look at the attacking options, obviously there's Rafael, Leao that's being linked. You've got the situation with Broja, who is on his way to the tour. I believe he's been on a private jet with Raheem Sterling on his way out to LA. You now have West Ham changing their interest away from him and looking at Scamacca. So I think there's a number of opportunities for some of those Chelsea young players to really impress in pre-season. That, again, slightly changes transfer plans if they look the part and look like they can handle a first-team position.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with Colwell, his pedigree is clear. He had a fantastic season last year. And really, one of the biggest compliments I think you can pay to him for that was he stood out at the level, not just for ability, but for attitude and leadership. And for somebody so young, that's really, really impressive. Obviously, even despite that, it's always a massive step to be a Chelsea regular. I hope that they give him the opportunity to be in rotation this season, if that makes sense. So I think, and I think, bringing in Koulibaly, presupposing it gets done, as long as there's no hitches with that or anything, bringing him in, I think hopefully it would suggest there's more chance for Colwell, because obviously you're bringing in somebody with that level of experience who is used to helping others develop, and no doubt would be well on board for doing that in tandem with Thiago Silva. And obviously De Ligt, he's a fantastic player, but equally he's still only 22. So it's easy to forget that because he's been around for such a long time. So his next move is a massive challenge for him, as much as it's a big signing for probably Bayern now. Let's be honest, but in many ways, Koulibaly's a better fit, and like you're saying as well, money wise, 2 for the price of 1. That's not bad if that's what gets over the line.
Well, this is it. It's about that, and I think the balance has got to be right. Now, listen, we know Nathan Ake. That deal again. It appears that sort of fee is fine. Player wants to join. It's just structural. The boring stuff fans don't care about, the legality, structures, the payment plan on things, and then there's all the image right elements. All these things take time that slow deals down. Of course, Nathan Ake isn't at the level in most people's opinions of De Ligt. Koulibaly right now is probably better than De Ligt. So the combining of the two is very good business when you consider how many centre backs have kind of left Chelsea, and the rebuild and the refreshing that particular area needs. It's almost a case of, well, you drop 70-80 million on one player, it might lead to holes elsewhere. So I think it's tremendous business that Chelsea have done there. Of course, Raheem Sterling is done, and that will happen. A few of the fans are asking, what do you think is going to happen now with Jules Koundé? Because obviously that was a player that very much looked on the cusp of happening. A lot of journalists earlier in the summer sort of de facto done deals. They couldn't see it not happening. That's now, it seems that he is now Barca bound. Still, no one knows where Barca are getting their money from, but Barca bound with him. Do you expect to see Chelsea completely pull away? I mean, have they already completely pulled away from this deal as far as you're aware?
No, I think it probably still, I think, look, one of the strengths Chelsea do have from their busy summer and short summer, if that makes sense, in terms of their negotiations, is that's actually a really good negotiating tool, I think, because, going at a number of targets at the same time and letting everybody know, everyone's aware that, they might be talking to, 5 or 6 players / clubs for one position, and maybe they want 2 or 3. Well, everyone in that situation, especially the clubs, know it's like, okay, well, if we don't move with this quickly, then they'll move on potentially. And so, I don't think it's the worst strategy in the world. Obviously, you run the risk of not getting certain deals over the line, obviously, and then that can be interpreted negatively. But I think overall, it's a pretty smart way to resolve the situation this summer. Remains to be seen whether that's a long-term strategy, but certainly for this year, it seems to be paying dividend. And with Koundé, the interest is still there. I mean, it's been long term. Obviously, they shifted priorities and plans since the owners have changed, and so I think that sort of falls into that same category where if there's still a chance it could happen, but again, it will come down to numbers, really. I think probably with Sevilla, and this time last year, obviously those conversations didn't go well, and they're the sorts of things that sometimes linger in the selling club's mind, don't they? But like you said, I mean, because the issue is, and this was the issue with Frenkie all along, is that where will Barcelona find the money to complete a deal that's suitable to selling clubs? So there's still a few question marks. And I think as long as they get their house in order now, basically, then what the business they're trying to do will happen, I think. But
well, there's another 300 to 400 million euros due with the sort of second phase of selling off assets, which you would expect. It's interesting because someone sent me a breakdown financially. De Jong will be paid as much next year as what Barca have offered Lewandowski, Koundé, and Rafinha combined in salaries. So you can understand why, with some of the legacy contracts, they kind of want to move some of these players on because, of course, there's bigger ramifications. But yeah, Barca seemingly look like they're going to push hard on that. And as you say, Chelsea's approach, I think for a lot of Chelsea fans, the approach has been so different this summer compared to how it's been under Roman. It's almost a little bit of a shock to the system. Like, why are we linked to so many? It feels a little bit sort of Peritici at Tottenham-esque, where it's just, I'm going to just speak to all these different players at the same time. They're all targets. We'd like them all. And we'll see what deals kind of come out the woodwork and out of fruition. And Todd Boehly just traveling around Europe. Again, I'm not a Chelsea fan, so it doesn't really matter to me whether it succeeds or fails. But I'm quite enjoying watching him work. What's the feedback you've been getting when talking to agents and clubs and people around Chelsea around the approach of Todd Boehly sort of so far since taking over at Chelsea?
I think generally the consensus is he's sort of warming to the task, really enjoying it, and he's been sort of really energized and enthused by it all. And I think that was key to the decision for him to take on the chairmanship. And I think that was potentially not initially the idea, but I think he and Behdad Eghbali and Clearlake Capital and the other partners in the consortium sort of sat down and had conversations and effectively came to the conclusion that even if Todd Boehly wasn't in the position of chairman, that would effectively be the role he'd be fulfilling anyway. So it just made sense for him to have that role. And I think that then gives a very clearly defined structure to the setup. And I think that that's sort of streamlined things. And I think that really helps with the leadership, because it's very clear who's doing what and who's in charge and who's driving things forward. And so I think that even when it comes to negotiations with other clubs and agents and advisors and whoever, that very much helps because they know he's in charge. And I think people have been impressed with. He's just people say that he's got quite a calm way about him, but he's quite measured, but he's also very focused. So yeah, I don't think there's much messing around really. But equally, he's very personable. He's very relaxed, and I think it's a style that people have appreciated because it's giving players and clubs, they're moving quickly, but also trying to give players and clubs breathing space within it, and I think that's been respected all round.
Well, a big part of it is relationships, isn't it? It's building your relationship, and this is where certain clubs that sit in the top six over the last 9 to 10 years have damaged themselves because the feedback's been that people haven't enjoyed dealing with them. Agents, other clubs, there's been a sense of arrogance, or you don't know what you're talking about, and it makes it harder to do business. And if Todd Boehly's coming in, and we were speaking to Ben Jacobs last week, and the feedback Leeds gave around Chelsea's approach towards Rafinha, they said it was like a breath of fresh air in terms of just trying to get business done, and there was a level of respect there, and that will help. I'm sure at some point in the future that's going to pay dividends, and that's going to give, Chelsea will get something out of that. It isn't always about the here and now and what we win at this moment in time. One of the questions that's come through here is, do you think Chelsea will sign a defensive midfielder? It's a position Tuchel has been asked about since last year. A lot of Chelsea fans on our streams will sit there and say, without a new DM, the rest of the signings are almost irrelevant because we're not going to do anything this year. Is there any talk of a new midfield player coming into Chelsea?
Well, I don't think that talk gets much further than Declan Rice, to be honest, and we come right back around to that, that favourite. But clearly West Ham's position is very obvious on that one, and I think everyone knows the player's mind too, in that he'd love it, but equally he loves being at West Ham. So it's a bit of a win-win situation for Declan Rice, isn't it? Because if nothing happens, he's probably going to be West Ham captain and move forward with a squad that's progressing under David Moyes, obviously a really good manager and somebody that's easy to get behind. Or if a move would happen in the end, then if it would materialise, then he gets to go back to Chelsea. But I think That's something that's, if anything's going to happen there, I think it would be sort of back end of the window, and it sort of still feels unlikely at this point. But then equally, like you were saying, the way the transfer window is, everything changes so much day to day. Everything can be different in 4 days' time. So it'd be pretty folly to talk about and to try and make big predictions about whether that would happen or not now. Yeah. But I think otherwise, certainly, there's big interest in Jorginho from Italy, from Juventus are still keen, but he is, he said it I think yesterday, and he's still really he loves Chelsea, and he said that to me last season, and he loves it, and he very happily stay and sign on for more, and so it's one of those things really. It's whether still a few things would have to shift around, I think, for them to bring in another high profile specialist defensive midfielder, if that makes sense. Because I mean, I think if you've got Kante, Kovacic, Jorginho, they brought Saul in on loan last year, who came with a big reputation, a player that Chelsea had monitored and watched and liked a lot for a long time, and they finally got him, and it didn't work, and I think that's absolutely not a criticism of the player. It's just, look at those three guys that are there and trying to get minutes around it when you're trying to settle in a new country and those sorts of things. And when he did have chances, he didn't hit his level, did he? And when the chances are so few and far between, and you don't get an opportunity to get a rhythm, then I mean, let's be clear. If they brought in Declan Rice, he's not going to be fourth choice, is he? But but that's the thing. So I think something would have to shift around for
I agree. No, I agree. I think that, but this is where sometimes there's a longer game here for fans to think about, and we don't always want to do that as football fans. The same people celebrating, they're going to actually listen to Tuchel. They're going to trust Tuchel's talent ID. They're going to give him what he thinks he feels and needs. If Tuchel says, I'd rather wait until next summer when Declan Rice is available, because in the longer term, that's going to serve Chelsea better, in my opinion. That's where fans have sometimes just got to say, okay, then we'll wait. I mean, where would Liverpool be if instead of waiting those 6 months for Virgil van Dijk, they went and signed somebody else who was, he's been integral? And I'm not suggesting, and because it would trigger certain people, that Declan Rice is going to ever be the best midfielder in the world, as Van Dijk is the best centre back in the world right now. But the point remains the same. I think that we've seen in this current era of football, the amount of teams who sign the wrong player because they just want to fill a hole, as opposed to waiting for the right individual person. I mean, Chelsea did it last year with Lukaku. In the end, it wasn't right. They would have probably been better off keeping Broja for the season. He would have probably had a better year than Lukaku. And hindsight's lucrative and everything else. But I just think that Chelsea fans have got to be a little more patient. Trevor here says he thinks that he's told that Declan Rice has got a gentleman's agreement with West Ham to stay. Well, I think Declan Rice would do one more year at West Ham before he starts actually pushing for a move, because with all due respect, he doesn't want to be like Harry Kane, one of the best players in the world in his position, but winning nothing. Like he needs to go somewhere to win. He needs to fulfill his potential. So that wouldn't be a massive surprise. Another midfield player that Daily Smith asks about here, Nick, is Matheus Nunes to Chelsea. There was a big rumor last week that Chelsea were in for him. Is there any real substance to that? Is it something Chelsea are monitoring?
I think the situation there is that Nunes is represented by family, from what I'm told, but also Mendes has been acting on behalf of the club, talking to people about players and seeing and sort of gauging interest from clubs. So I think Nunes's name came up. I think that Nunes's name came up in the meeting that Todd Bowley had with George Mendes. But so I think that's where the sort of where there's a slight disconnect, because that was more from the club side there, sort of floating the idea. And so, but I think it's not really got any further than that. So, because I think, because he's a hell of a player, and obviously Pep Guardiola said what he said about him, saying he's one of the best in the world. but he's a definite 8, I think. And he's more in the sort of Kovacic mold. But I think maybe it's one that he'd maybe. So I think the first thing to say, he'd be too good to be the 4th choice. Let's be blunt about it. I think, and I don't see why the player would move to do that in that 4. But also, I think he's better slightly higher up the field. So I mean, I know he does play in that in a similar system, but I just don't know in the 3-4-3 if Chelsea would see him to fit into that double 6 as Tuchel likes to call it. Remains to be seen as well if Chelsea will maybe at times play in a different system in the season. If they bring in all the defensive targets they're linked with, then I don't see why they couldn't play a 4. But equally, I'm not sure that's going to suit Thiago Silva brilliantly. So
no, I agree. From an attacking point of view, Serge Gnabry, what's the word there right now? Because there's talk that he wouldn't pick Chelsea because of Arsenal connections. You started to see yesterday just more and more journalists kind of talk about Chelsea monitoring this situation. Is it a move you could see Chelsea seriously move towards trying to complete this summer?
I think definitely interest, from what I understand. He's certainly someone who, again, is another player with experience. He's got obviously experience of England, so you wouldn't say he's got major Premier League experience, but he's spent time in England. He knows what it's like to live, in the country. He knows. So if he came to the Premier League, he would know very much what he was letting himself in for, and that's sometimes half the battle, isn't it? With players sort of settling down. And Chelsea are certainly, looking for experience where they can find it. So he would fit that bill. It's the kind of player that they're looking at. From what I understand, I think Chelsea wouldn't be put off by the fact that he has the Arsenal links, and he's sort of said in the past he wouldn't be so keen on playing for another London team. I think the reality would be if the deal was the right one, in all facets, and let's be blunt, sort of money comes into that, then I think he'd probably be receptive. So I think that's probably just one. Have to see what happens next, really.
I totally agree. When I saw the talk of he wouldn't go and play for Chelsea because of his Arsenal links, I thought he barely kicked a ball for Arsenal. Like, with all due respect, and I also think Gnabry, in his heart of hearts, will have a burn. And again, if you're Chelsea and you're trying to sell this mission to him, it would be, listen, Arsenal didn't fancy you. Tony Pulis and West Brom basically said you were an absolute nothing. You've gone on to be one of the best attacking players in European football. Come back here, we'll pay you out handsomely, and you can prove to the Premier League that you're the real deal. There's a real selling point, a motivational aspect there that you would put aside from the financial compensation, the bonuses, the image rights, the fame, the Champions League football, Tuchel. That's all amazing. But equally, listen, come back here and prove, rub salt into the wound. And look, maybe he does have a deep lying love and respect for Arsenal. But if Cesc Fabregas would go and play for Chelsea, if Sol Campbell would go and play for Arsenal, for anyone to delude themselves into thinking, with all due respect, Serge Gnabry, who isn't born and bred from that part of London, didn't support them as a kid, no, he'll go Chelsea, no shadow of a doubt, if that offer is right. I mean, the interesting thing with Chelsea, though, is the attacking options. Raheem Sterling is there on his way to LA right now. That's over the line. Of course, they looked at Richarlison's and Gabriel Jesus's and Rafinha's were all in and around being needed. What are they going to do for extra attacking power, prowess? I mean, Serge Gnabry, yes, there's links to Rafael, Leao from, what do I want to say, AC Milan? Is it AC Milan he plays? It is AC Milan. So what are Chelsea looking to do in the attacking areas to give them a little bit more bite to their bark?
Well, I think the reason why they've been looking at trying to recruit in that style is they're sort of trying to add, fluidity and extra movement to the forward line. These are targets who are predominantly wingers, but can also play through the middle if required. I mean, Sterling can play as a false nine. I mean, obviously Havertz in the setup Chelsea have got at the moment, that would be, you see Havertz through the middle as the main guy. I mean, Lukaku as a target man, we know what happened. That didn't really work for all the reasons that don't need to be sort of rehashed today. But so I think that's kind of made them think, well, I think it would only be if, an outstanding old school centre forward became available, that they go in for that. And I think really the guy who sort of comes into that category is Lewandowski. If that didn't happen with Barca, then I think Chelsea would definitely, be very strong on that. And from what I understand, and I think that would be something that would sit outside what they're doing elsewhere, basically. So it's almost a bonus if they could. And it would be good, and it's also unlikely, let's be honest. But a player of that kind of caliber and ability and everything he'd add, then obviously I think they would get stuck in. But yeah, so it's probably more about adding a bit of a more sort of fluid approach to what they're going to do, because certainly whatever system they employ with Tuchel, it's all about high press and pushing hard and the ability to drop deep and as you've seen, the wing backs pushing on into the box and scoring goals, getting beyond the forwards, and so whoever plays through the middle has got to be somebody who can be as much of a false nine as a traditional nine.
Yeah, look, I totally get that, and I think Lewandowski is such an interesting one because, again, it's one of those rumors where it's almost there is an interest, but Chelsea won't make a move until they know what's happening with Barca. Now, it's being reported by credible but Barca journalists that the deal is going to happen. But again, these same Barca journalists 2 days ago were telling us everything is very, very hot with frenkie de Jong leaving. There's confidence from Man United, and now that's stalled again because, and we were talking briefly backstage. You're never told the full details of the story, generally speaking, or the after effect. A journalist might tell you what they've been told, and they're probably saying that because that's literally the sentence or two that the club has briefed them with. Yeah, we're very close to getting this deal done. Relax. There's very rarely any more information. That the rest of it's almost a case of, well, I'm gonna kind of give an opinion based on what I'm being told, and I think Lewandowski will end up at Barcelona, but equally, maybe Chelsea are just holding back from pursuing other quote unquote number nines just until they see what happens with that. Because what you wouldn't want to do if you're Chelsea right now is go and buy, I'm going to make a name up here just for the sake of it, Dominic Calvert-Lewin. It isn't going to be him, but I'm using him as an example. Buy Dominic Calvert-Lewin today, okay, or another number 9 today, and then in 48 hours time, the Lewandowski deal falls through, and now you're stuck because you've just bought somebody else. Sometimes you have to just keep your powder dry and wait a little bit. And I know fans don't want that. They want the players in and over the line, but you sometimes have to just wait a little bit. Man United did it last year with Rafael Varane. Like they had Pau Torres seemingly all tied, sewn up. And they just delayed because of what's going on. Chelsea have done it with Jules Koundé themselves. They're just going, well, let's not sign him yet. And let's see who else becomes available, who else we might be able to land. So I think Chelsea's attacking options are interesting there. We'll come back to that super chat in a minute, my guy. On the attackers, what is the link to Rafael Leao? Is that something that Chelsea are active in right now, or is it more a case of just monitoring that situation as well?
Yeah, I think similar to Serge Gnabry, I think there is interest there. Yeah, and I think and it wouldn't surprise me at all if the players interested. I think what the difficulty will be, Milan are in negotiations with him on a new deal, long-term contract, and I think from their perspective, they most probably think they're pretty far down, far along in that process. So that kind of puts it in the position where for him to leave this summer would take a big fee. Big money, and I think it's potentially money that Chelsea wouldn't want to. I mean, in an ideal world, they wouldn't want to pay, the figure that's been sort of talked about, 100 million euros, for example, that kind of category. That's a lot of money, and for one player. So again, it'd be stupid to rule anything out, but I think that seems like a long shot at the moment. But yes, certainly, the guy. I mean, he's he's an exciting, talented player who can make things happen. It's creative. It's got that little spark about him, and somebody that I think there's a lot of respect for him at Chelsea.
There certainly is. I mean, again, as you say, this is what happens. 100 million euros is put on his name. I mean, the guy scored 14 goals last year. He's not old. He ain't young. He's 23 now. He's going into those mid years. I mean, there's no way Chelsea are dropping 100 million on him. He isn't pulling up Mbappe numbers, Haaland numbers to kind of warrant that. But that's where the negotiations start. And it feels kind of like at this point of the window, we're going into like phase 2 of the summer window. There's a lot of new targets and new names that weren't necessarily being spoken about a few weeks back. And of course, that's because the market shrinks, because options get taken up and we kind of move forward. And it does feel like Chelsea need the extra attacking option, which they're going to kind of progress into. But a few more comments and questions that came through. First one here was, what about Ampadu? Very versatile, had a good loan spell. Is that a player you see staying at Tottenham, or is it more likely that he goes out again, or is finally sold?
I think that probably still remains to be seen. I think one of the things that is happening, and it's about to happen. It started to happen, but it's about to happen. Is that Thomas Tuchel wanted to take a good look at people in pre-season. So, I think he'd come into that category. I think he was on the record saying that he wanted to do that with a number of players. I'm not sure. I don't think Ampadu was name checked, but I think, he'd come into that category. And I think what is, I think Tuchel's as good as his word there. Like you said, Bru's on the way out, and he's joining the squad, and he'll get his opportunity, and Cole's having his chance, and hopefully likewise Ampadu as well. It remains to be seen, really, again, because I think part of that might come into, what the player what the player wants will come into that. But he could obviously fit into a defensive midfield slot, and maybe that's somebody who could, perhaps he would be happy with being the guy who would mix and match in, around the other three. But equally, there's obviously Billy Gilmore and Conor Gallagher, and it's I think Gallagher will stay with the squad, but obviously he's best employed further up the pitch. Similar sort of situation with Gilmore, because he's at his best in a traditional 8 role, so he can play 6, but that doesn't necessarily get the best out of him. And then obviously there's Loftus-Cheek as well. So there's a few there's probably a few guys that Ampadu needs to maybe jump ahead of for that to be definite. Not necessarily because of ability, more because of what fits most with the overall sort of versatility of the squad. Because guys like Gilmore, for example, yes, he's best further up the field, but the fact that he can also sit in as a 6, and the guys who've got all that extra versatility, sometimes that's really, really important for just building the overall squad, isn't it? And what you were saying about waiting for the right player, I think that's one thing that Tuchel has been really strong on, because at the back end of last season, when we were asking him about when things are still slightly up in the air, the sale wasn't completely finished. We were asking him, will he be here next year? And he was like, absolutely, of course, without a doubt. And and we're sort of saying about what would the squad look like, and at that point he was saying, well, I don't really know, but whatever it looks like, I will coach it, and I'll be quite happy to coach whatever I'm given, basically. And obviously things have changed since. It's not as much as him being given it now. He's got a strong hand in compiling it. But that attitude of I will coach what there is, I think is another big asset to Chelsea, because again, that's something that they can also use it to take back into those negotiations, because like you say, they're not going to panic buy someone, or it certainly seems like that. And so that does give them another hand in their negotiations.
Yeah, I totally get that. There's a question here from Trevor that says, Terry, do you think Barca, to you as well, do you think Barca will hijack Koulibaly from Chelsea like they did with Leeds? Barca didn't hijack Chelsea. Chelsea hijacked Barca. I love that. Fun. That was like a hijack upon hijack upon hijack. But it's very unlikely that Koulibaly is going to end up at Barcelona from this stage. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously there was strong interest within Italy, wasn't there? And I think Napoli were always going to be more minded to sell, to an overseas club, and I think I think it's a good fit all around at this point. Hopefully, I think the fee should be in the ballpark of what Napoli were after, and contract numbers I don't think are an issue. I think the situation was that Napoli have done their best to try to keep the player, but have their financial limits, and it would be no major issue for Chelsea to top that. And also they understand that it's a guy that's been there for something like 8 years, and this is a move this summer. If it doesn't happen, maybe he never moves. So because of his age profile and contracts and things. So this is his time, isn't it? And I think sometimes clubs are just understanding and realistic of the fact that respect what a player's done for them and let them go with their blessing.
Absolutely. Just some breaking news from Gerard Romero, who said that Barca have now reached a total agreement with Jules Koundé. So that appears that's on personal terms. Still things to do with Sevilla. And again, these create knock-on effects. Maybe Chelsea go, right, well, he's going to go now, so let's trigger a move for somebody else. This is the nature of the beast. There's a comment here from Casey. He says Gnabry is a treble winner, not at a much bigger club, 6-time European champions in Bayern. He has nothing to prove. Maybe he doesn't. I think it's a fair point. I just think I think he does. I think in his heart of hearts there will be, and he's an athlete, he's a professional. All the top athletes, whenever you speak to them, there is this burning desire to win and not lose, but also to prove naysayers wrong. Like you hear the amount of autobiographies of sports stars I've read, whether they're singular sports stars or people from sports teams, and to quote Michael Jordan, they take certain things personally, and they want to come back. That's certainly an element, an angle. Of course, that's not the only reason he'd come back to the Prem. You've got to pay him right. Thomas Tuchel, top 5 managers in the world right now. I still think Chelsea fans are kind of writing off their squad like they can't come. I mean, they were one bad month away from being in the title race all year, really and truly. And then things fell off towards the end of the season, but I just felt like Chelsea stopped trying to a degree. It was almost, we know we're third, can't win anything. It was almost like things just let go a little bit. But I'm sure this Chelsea team is going to be firing next year. But Casey, thank you for that comment. Eric here says, question, what if Frenkie de Jong refuses to stay? Refuse Man United and stays. Barca can't do anything, right? They can't force a pay cut since they legally bid the contract. We're going to talk Frenkie de Jong on a show later on this afternoon after the stalling news from Fabrizio. But it's a great question because that's actually what we were talking about backstage, weren't we? Around no one knows the ramifications of, or no one's reporting on the ramifications of Frenkie de Jong staying. Does he get stuck in the stands? Does he play football? Is it business? If it's business as usual, that's what I'm more intrigued about now.
I think in the era we're in at the moment, I think things would have to be really bad for a player to be either, benched continually because of if a player's kind of sort of shut out or the player goes on strike or something like that. I think the era we're in is that would just be that's unlikely. I mean, obviously, again, you can never say never with football, and that's one of the reasons why we love it, isn't it? But I think that's pretty unlikely. But I think it feels like this is from the outside looking in, really, to be quite honest. But it feels like that situation's just got a bit more to run on it, and I think it probably means, reading between the lines, it probably means that just negotiations are continuing. It wouldn't be unusual for the club and the player to come to sort of a compromise agreement about a payout on what he's owed, which would then allow him to make the move. And if that's something that Barcelona want to do because they want to use the money elsewhere, then eventually it's pretty common for a player to think, okay, I don't want to leave, but let's make not the best of a bad situation, but let's understand the reality of the situation if they won't budge on that, and agree a deal that's palatable, and take an opportunity at United.
No, I totally agree. And as Eric pointed out here, Xavi's already said that if he stays, he plays. And I think that's absolutely fair. I'm talking, it's not really the reaction Xavi has to him and talking to the viewers.
Yes.
It's more the reaction the board's going to have, because they are the ones trying to sell him. What are they going to think and feel? Does it become a fractious situation? And like you say, the report is Barca says pay cut or leave. He's saying, I'm staying and not taking a pay cut. I'm just intrigued about that element of it, whether that's okay, fair enough, and we'll all just move on as normal. Or as you say, is that a negotiation stance from De Jong and his camp to say, well, you need to give us that money? Simon Stone, who is very credible, was stated.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And a lot of journalists have. This is being held up because of this £17 million situation. Again, depends on how you view the situation. I've said all along this deal can fall through. I've said all along, I'm more worried. I'm actually still more worried about a Chelsea getting heavily involved than I am a deal being struck between Barca, Frenkie de Jong and Manchester United. I still think that's more of a concern in this. But look, it's certainly an intriguing one. It's been an amazing window so far, and that's another one of them. There's a question here from Gary. This is a question. Is there any truth in Kante to Arsenal?
I think no. I think overall. No. I mean, I don't, I think... I think from what I've heard, I think that's a bit of a long one. I mean, look, I'm sure Arsenal are one of the clubs that would love to have him. But I think, it's, I think also Thomas Tuchel absolutely loves N'Golo Kante, and he's on the record about that. Anytime you ask him, he's and he'll say, he calls him Chelsea's Superman, and he considers Kante, one of the most important players at Chelsea. And obviously, injuries have blighted recent times, but when he's at his absolute best, there's no one else in the world who can do what he does, and Tuchel knows that and knows how to use that within the system. And it's not an accident that they play with a double six, because if you have two holding midfielders and one of them's N'Golo Kante, then you can allow Kante basically to do. He almost has a free role in that sort of defensive third to go and chase turnovers. The guy alongside him builds the structure. So when it's working, it's very, very hard to do anything about, isn't it? And obviously, turnover ball leads to quick counter attacks and opportunities and goals and things. So, he's somebody that Chelsea have massive regard for, and Tuchel has massive regard for. So, certainly at the moment, they definitely want him to stay put.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see him leaving just yet, especially if no other midfield players coming in. So it's one of those things. If suddenly the Declan Rice deal was alive and that could happen, maybe then there's a case of, right, well, we have to move Kante on, and we, maybe Broja leaves, then we move a player like that. But yeah, I can't see him leaving until a star is coming in to replace him. Sully here says, as a Man United fan, just imagine how I woke up. I think he means in tears. The guy needs time and cash flow, is what he's saying there. Ninos says, of course, Thomas Tuchel will coach any team he's given. I'm sure before he took the role, he would have given the green light to spending on big players. What other team has the luxury to spend 90 million on a striker only to loan him out again the following season?
Well, I see that point, but I think also to slightly counter that, he had arguably the world's biggest resources at PSG, and it didn't go swimmingly, did it? And he wasn't backwards and coming forwards at the time with the difficulties. He was. There were obviously some issues there, weren't there? And it wasn't always smooth sailing. But in the time he's been at Chelsea, he's been bowled over by everything at the club in terms of the setup off the field and the training ground and the academy at Cobham, and the ability really for him and his staff just to come in and do their job and and press on, and everything else is, of the standard he would want, not just expect, but just would want, and that's been a real big boost to him. And so he, he's been really appreciative of that. Make perhaps more than some other managers might, but so within that, he's always had this attitude of, well, the system's so good here that I can just come in and do my job, and I'm very happy with that. And that attitude of, I'll just coach what I'm given, actually was very smart in terms of even when he started on day one, saying, because he had a short-term contract, and when he was asked about that, does that mean his future's up in the air? And he said, well, it doesn't matter. You sign a 5-year contract. If you have a bad 8 months, you'll get sacked anyway, basically. And so that attitude of, it doesn't matter, and the pressure, and I put the pressure on myself, because if I don't perform, I know I'll get sacked, and I deserve to. Then that was not only honest, but very, very shrewd in terms of, it took a lot of pressure off the board at that time, as well as him, because it was effectively saying to them, look, that's fine, because that's football. And if that's what happens, nobody's going to be painting you as the bad guys, because I'll be saying to people I deserved it, effectively. So it was really smart relationship building from him in the regime that existed at the time. And that continues, because Tuchel's a very, very clever guy, very astute man, but he's also really, someone that is really engaging. And it's fascinating to listen to his sort of ideas about football and just how to approach it generally.
Yeah, I think Thomas Tuchel is I don't know what it is. He's a Champions League winner. He's a league title winner. There doesn't seem to be the same level of respect paid to him as there are other managers in the Premier across Europe. And I don't really quite understand it, but I'm sure, again, I just feel like with Chelsea, I did a video a few weeks ago saying I'm scared of Chelsea, and that's been predominantly because if you give the manager what he wants for his system, which he's been there 18 months, and I still don't really think has been given players that suit what he wants and what he needs to the nth degree, I think you create a seriously dangerous team. But Nick, been an absolute pleasure to talk through some of these transfers with you, talk about Chelsea, get your insight on what's going on. Viewers, we appreciate all of you, your super chats. Make sure you smash the like button before you leave today. Until next time, everybody, take care of yourselves. Goodbye. God bless. And we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.